Hello everyone, my name is Alma Costa and today I am going to be discussing my final project, as many of you guys are doing as well. I must admit it was difficult picking a public policy to discuss for my final project because I don't really consider myself someone who really tries delving into political topics, into policies that are surrounding politics or policies that we're governed by. And it's not because I don't care about my rights as a citizen. I care about the rights of every other citizen. However, in this day and age, I'm not as well informed as I should be. I neglect the fact that we do have really reliable sources out there. But through this class, and through the assignments that we've done for this class so far, I have really been challenged to really seek out the types of information that is out there to really inform myself as a citizen, as an American, as just a human, to realize that there are a lot of outlets that share information that can help us understand what kind of policies we're being governed by. One of the conflicts that I will be looking at today is the controversy surrounding the state-of-the-art renovation at El Rancho High School in Pico Rivera. And so as you can see by the title of this screen, it says Pico Rivera Pay to Play, the El Rancho High School State-of-the-Art Renovation Project. And so I'll explain the pay to play later on. But so far, I will be discussing this renovation project that my city is working towards for the only high school in our city and our district. And so I wouldn't necessarily call this project a policy, but I would like to note that there are a lot of very similar elements between what is going on in Pico Rivera and what Rhonda Trotman cited or talked about in her paper titled Small Town Policymakers. And we read that article, well, some of us read that article about during week 5, I believe. And so I was really impacted by that article because I saw a lot of similarities and mirroring between what is going on in that article and what is currently going on here right now in my city. And so it was that very article that inspired me to look into the city scandal that is currently going on. And so as someone who grew up in this town, I feel very proud, happy, and blessed to see how far we've come and how united we are as a city. Because, the city has had a lot of stigma, negative stigma in the past regarding gang violence, being ghetto, and even now I have gone to other cities and when I mention my city they're like, oh, isn't it dangerous, isn't it this and that. But for the most part, there has been a lot of growth. And when I heard about the renovations towards the high school, I thought nothing of it. I thought, this is great for our city, this is amazing, we're really growing as a city. However, I didn't realize there was an uproar and quite a bit of community members who were not pleased with this until recently, when pink slips were passed out to superintendents and principals within the school district. And so once I've heard this, I decided to look into the Whittier Daily News and do my research. And so I found an article titled 23 Superintendents and Principals Received Pink Slips, something along those lines. And so it stated in the article that this was allegedly done to increase accountability amongst the principals and administrators. But, of course, as I continued reading on, this was a type of way to it was an accountability method, but in a way to kind of scare the principals, administrators into being more accountable for their actions. This included the very vagueness: would they be fired? Would they be moving to new sites? Would they be promoted? And so of course a lot of people are in uproar, especially because a lot of these principals and administrators are very close to their heart. Again, we are a very close community. And so as I read more about this article, I noted that one of the board members of the school district stated, "We are being manipulated and I have no confidence that this school board and the superintendent are acting on their best interest of this community." And so I wondered, what does this have to do with the building? Because a lot of people mentioned the building when they would bring up the pink slips. And so in reality, it didn't really have to do with the building, it had to do more with the board. And so the demolition of the high school buildings, B and C, were in the first phase. And so this was advanced by a 3-2 vote between the board members. And so this phase includes 18 learning suites, a special education classroom, and a 4,500 seat stadium with college level baseball and softball fields. And so Jose Lara, the president of the board, stated, "While we see points of disagreement at times, we also see a lot of unity. I just want to make sure we note that whatever way you vote on this, I want you to see that we can work together as a team." And so as you can see over here, they're working as a team. Very lovely. You know, this is the essence of Pico Rivera. However, Dr. Moreno stated that I truly believe that we are proceeding backwards and we're starting to tear something down without timelines, without a budget, without structural assessment, etc. And so it was very apparent to me that there are some discrepancies on the board's perspective of this issue. So I tried relating it back to Trotman's paper to see if I could understand what is going on within the city. And so some effective strategies she suggests to policymakers that are simplistic, achievable, and realistic are building a consensus, planning properly, rallying resources, instilling leadership, and communicating effectively. And so, you know, behind the scenes of me researching my small town, I researched the methods that Trotman used to, you know, make sure that policymakers are really making their best effort to work together as a team. And so if these skills are so simplistic, why is there so much discrepancy between the board and what they're saying in these articles? And so in order to find out, I decided to look more into how the board was communicating, and, you know, through the reading of articles, I discovered this. And so in total, there are 5 board members: Carolyn Castillo, Dr. Teresa Moreno, Leanne Ibarra, who is the clerk, the vice president, Gabriel Orozco, and the president of the board, Jose Lara. And so in the Whittier Daily News, just to give some context so we can understand where we're going from here, Carolyn Castillo and Teresa Moreno are the minority of the divided 2-3 voting board. And so there was a while ago where they were trying to decide whether or not it would be a better plan to reconstruct the high school or renovate the high school. So basically to rebuild or renovate. Should we tear down the buildings or should we try fixing it a little bit inside? And so, you know, through many voting processes, the vote was split 3-2. And so the majority chose to rebuild the high school. And so we see this again with the tearing down of the B building, the C building. And so the board, in the article, it says the board was set to hear presentations from firms to help it select a company to complete a feasibility report. And so within the first public voting, the 3-2 splits were already beginning. And so the agenda, or the item of the agenda to hear presentations, was immediately removed. So the option to even hear to hear the list of different options, we had to decide who would be contracted to renovate, was steamrolled. It was already chosen. And so the vote to do that, to remove the agenda thing, or to remove the item from the agenda, was introduced by the Vice President Gabriel Orozco. And he had stated in the article that he had already made up his mind on a complete rebuild. So it was his way or the highway, basically. And it was something that he decided, and he stated that the community decided. He based it off of data where the people voted. 2/3 of the majority passed the bond to rebuild the El Rancho High School. And so when I did more research, I found out that this data he used was based off of 2016 data. And so we'll go more into that right now. But he and Jose Lara stated that we should move forward with all deliberate speed, so as fast as we can. However, former business chief Gregory Fromm stated, you know, we didn't go out for the bid to not rebuild El Rancho High School. We went out to maximize our funds and to get the most of our bond money, because even though we have the $200 million in bonds that, you know, the city did vote for, we don't have the ability to access all of it. And so we want to build something that we can afford and have dollars left in the bond to address the needs of our school. And so further on in the article, I'm sorry if I'm taking a lot of time, but Carolyn Castillo stated that it's not okay to demolish a high school without an approved plan, schedule, and budget. And I learned more about her when reading this article. She has worked 3 decades in the facilities management for Boeing, and she's also the author of a lot of scholarly papers in the subject, which covers managing capital projects such as new construction. And so this is very interesting to see how within the board there is a really useful resource that is not being used. And so the previous board before this had fired a construction management firm called HPLE, run by a man named Jaime Ortiz, which was overseeing the project. However, a lot of people were very upset about him being rehired after being fired because, for one, it took $50,000 to fire him. And so he was immediately being rehired. But besides the money being an issue, this is him right here. The main issue was the Sweetwater scandal. And so in the Sweetwater scandal, which was covered in the Los Cerritos community newspaper, it stated that 5 Sweetwater board members plead guilty to bribery charges in the pay-to-play scheme. Sweetwater Superintendent Jesus Candara was charged with 8 felony counts. And Jaime Ortiz was in charge of leading that project. And it was very shocking to me that the board was willing to hire someone who was caught in so much scandal. Not just the fact that they had the taxpayers contribute to the $50,000 that they used to fire him or to let him go, but now that they were rehiring him knowing his very sketchy past. And so as a citizen, these hasty decisions are red flags to me. And I decided to be bold enough to reach out to the board members so I could have a chance to voice my concerns while also trying to see if I could find out what the source of conflict was between the board members and the community. And so I tried contacting Dr. Marino, Mrs. Castillo, Jose Lara, and Gabriel Orozco. I didn't try reaching out to Miss Leanne, but I was fortunate enough to hear from Dr. Marino and Mrs. Castillo. And so Dr. Marino was the first person I talked to really get a better in-depth understanding of what the conflict looked like. And so she said that a lot of it was poor communication and lack of transparency from the board. And so an example of this was she said that the board is violating a very important act, which is the Brown Act, which states that the public has the right to attend and participate in legislative meetings. And so she began telling me that recently the forums, because a lot of the people are trying to bring up the issues regarding the buildings and the pink slips, that Jose Lara is making an effort to passive-aggressively censor the community from expressing their frustrations. He began a new rule where he gave people the 2 options. But beforehand, before the meetings began, you could go and speak about topics or items that were on the agenda or off the table or off the agenda. And now the new rule is that you're given 2 papers. If you're going to talk about something that is strictly on the agenda, then you can speak before the forum. However, if it's not in the agenda, which for the most part, the topics regarding the building and the superintendents and the pink slips, which typically are being avoided to be on they're obviously being avoided on the agenda, are left till the end of the forum. And so families or members are forced to wait about an hour and a half or even longer to express their needs. But allegedly he's saying we're communicating and understanding them. I understand what they're saying because they're voting. And so Dr. Teresa argued that, and I see this also in Trotman's article, is that an obstacle that can be faced sometimes by policymakers is, sorry about that, where is it? What's not, there it is proximity. And so proximity in which Trotman talks about in her article is a process that is transparent, that there must be a willingness to discuss issues in a full view of the public, and that the process should in theory always keep the best interests of the community in mind. And she further on goes on to say in her paper, whether discussing the annual budget, state or federal mandates, or other policy matters, open discussion is a vital part of the process. There needs to be a willingness to listen, to be open to input, and more importantly, consider the community feedback in the decision-making process. Traditional ways to solicit input include public hearings and open discussion of issues during regular meetings. And so through censoring the public, he is violating their right and I'm sorry if I'm using heavy words, but in my opinion, because I am a citizen, I do feel he is passively aggressively violating my right to be able to express my concerns regarding the issues. And so she continued to share, saying that he needs to own the problem, analyze it, and ask himself, what do I need to change? Instead he has decided to move on his own with the vice president. The next board member that I contacted was Carolyn Castillo. And so she reached out to me, which was very awesome. And she touched upon the barriers that she faces when working with the board. Some of the issues she mentioned were that were mentioned in the articles and that Dr. Marino mentioned were confirmed through what she had told me, ranging from Jaime Ortiz's very questionable background to Jose Lara's lack of communication and inclusion with the community and the board members. And so her concern and stance on the topic was, if I don't have the facts, I won't make quick decisions. However, with or without the facts, she states that Laura still insists moving on forward with the project. And the consequences, which I appreciate, she was very transparent with me. She said that the consequences that I would have to face as a taxpayer would be an increase from 1.5% in taxes to 2.5% in taxes, which is quite a lot. And so she continued to state that not only was he censoring the public from speaking up, but that he was also making an effort to remove agenda items that she, Ms. Castillo, and Dr. Marino were adding in order to get the public more involved. So they were making an effort to try adding topics on the agenda regarding the building and the pink slips. However, he was, without their permission, without their knowledge, removing those agendas. And so I didn't get the chance to ask Dr. Marino, but I did ask Dr. Castillo some questions regarding some of the concerns I had. And so the questions were, how will you ensure that the board members and citizens have a voice in the plans for the project? And so her question was simply to inform the public of what was going on. And so she did, again, like her colleague said, state that there's a lot of lack of communication and that communication is key in ensuring everyone is heard. When we look at, again, the obstacles that policy makers face, that Trotman brought up, apathy is one of them, that even though with tight budgets and limited resources, news releases, newsletters, websites, and local media are traditional means that we can get our resources, or that we can get our information. As described earlier, again, I'm kind of reading off of what Trotman said because I feel it does strongly relate to what's going on. The average citizen is not compelled to attend public meetings and hearings, in part because of indifference, lack of time, or information. Sadly, in many cases, even with good public marketing, important policy issues are completely ignored by the public. Public hearings are vacant and pleas for public comment go unfulfilled. Only when those non-participating or uninformed citizens realize that the issue has real and apparent impacts on them as individuals will an opinion surface after the fact. And so I do feel that, with a lot of apathy based on our community, we're not as involved, and in part it's not our fault entirely because we're not seeing the transparency. The board isn't communicating as effectively as they could. Another question I asked was what changes are we expecting to see in the school that will make it worth it for future students and taxpayers like myself? And so she did state that, a new environment does prepare for the future students to succeed. And I do believe that is true. However, I also agree with her statement saying that she doesn't believe that a better campus makes better students, that the learning happens between the students and teachers and the tools they use. And so finally, the final question I asked her was, should this project fail, who will be held accountable and which stakeholders are at risk of facing the consequences? And, we had a very lengthy discussion, but it came down to the fact that unfortunately there is a lack of accountability because of the lack of communication and the lack of transparency, but that she is trying to make efforts to fight this legally because we did get someone as sketchy as Jaime Ortiz involved in this, that they are trying to erase the fact that he was involved, and he has caused quite a dent in our budget, but that they are trying to make an effort to get legal advice on this. And so after hearing all of this, I kind of narrowed down some of the issues of some of the conflict down to a couple of issues. And so one of them is poor communication and lack of transparency from the board. The other source of conflict is the lack of accountability. That is very important, because if no one is being held accountable, then it's just a bunch of pointing fingers. Making decisions without facts, just as Dr. or Mrs. Castillo stated, that we cannot just hastily make decisions without facts. There are conflicts of interest and ideology, so the way they practice their methods, whether it be the way they communicate with the public, the way they make decisions with each other, it's very apparent that there's a lot of discrepancy going on. And finally, a main conflict is that there are many stakeholders at risk, not just taxpayers like myself, but the students who are involved in this and who are going to either benefit from this or be hurt by this. And so the proposals I had to resolve this was simply to first look at the board relationship. And so in Fisher's book, Getting to Yes, he brings up the fact that we should practice principal negotiation. And so that involves focusing on interests and oppositions, inventing options for mutual gain, and insisting on using objective criteria. And so he also brings up the use of the circle chart, which I have right here. The first step is to look at what is wrong. So what is wrong? Is there something wrong with the buildings? And if so, what is it? Maybe we don't have to necessarily, the next step would be to analyze, diagnosing the problem. What symptoms, what are the categories of that, And then finally the approach. What kind of approach are we going to use to tackle this? Is there different ideas we can do? And finally, step 4 says action ideas. So what might be done? What specific steps? Not just what are we going to blindly do, but what steps are we going to do? And so in that process, we do take the time to invent options. And so finally, I also feel that there needs to be a proposal to resolve the relationship between the board and the community, And so I looked at William Urie's book titled Getting Past No. And it said, I think this would be very impactful to see from the board members, but seeing them step to our side, to really listen actively, to paraphrase and ask for correction, not just hearing us, but actually trying to understand us. Acknowledging our points and our feelings, acknowledging us as people of the community, and acknowledging our competence, that we're not just blindly attending these meetings, that we are informed, that we are trying to inform ourselves while also to be prepared. To build a working relationship with the community, and to create a favorable climate for negotiation. Not one where we're being patronized, and not one where our vote means nothing, or that if it's a majority vote that speaks for all the citizens, because it truly doesn't. Especially the fact that majority of those votes are an older generation, which is nothing wrong with that. Of course, they want the best for us. But at the same time, it should be the future that speaks up when it comes to this educational turmoil. So with that being said, I really encourage you guys to try looking at your own communities. I mean, it was very eye-opening for me, and I'm really interested in trying to maybe attend one of these meetings one day to really speak up and get involved and really seek out information that will benefit me and that I can use, especially the skills that we're learning in this field, which are very powerful now that I'm looking at it, to see how I can actually give back to my community, and maybe how you guys can give back to your community using the skills that we're learning in this class and through this program. But here are my references, and I hope you guys continue to be motivated to really seek out the change that you want to be.